Good evening, church. Glad everybody could be here tonight as we continue our discussion groups, Encounters with God, in which we're talking about the way that God has initiated an activity with mankind. Mankind has the opportunity to react to God, to respond to God. And if he does it wisely and in faith, in a godly way, it will draw him closer to God. And that's what we want for us today, to be mindful of the way that God has initiated a relationship with us, to understand the ways that we have an opportunity to respond to God and how, because of that, we can draw closer to him. This week, we're going to look at two encounters with God where we compare and contrast them and juxtapose them together. And this week, it is Moses and Gideon. Moses and Gideon. Unique characters, unexpected characters, really, when you think about their stories, but there's a lot of parallels that unfold between the two. In both cases, God appeared to a man of unexpected position in life and gave him a very grand and dramatic command. Go and free my people. Now, these men were separated by centuries, and these men had very different circumstances when we're operating in very different geographies and times of history. Moses, for example, would have been roughly, most people estimate, in the 1500s BC, give or take a little bit. And Gideon would have been several hundred years later. Geographically, they couldn't have been in more different places. I mean, although kind of close, but Moses would have been operating primarily in Egypt. He would have been raised there, as you know, in the Pharaoh's house. But at about age 40, he was exiled of sorts. And then he went out and he took on a very, very different life. But it was about the age of 80, according to Stephen's account in Acts chapter 7, that he encountered a burning bush. And this would change Moses and many people's lives forever. This was God hearing the needs of his people and answering them. And it would be, it seems, at a very young age that Gideon, not in Egypt, but in the Promised Land, the land that God had anticipated that his people would go to after they come out of the Exodus. And he gave them this land that would be flowing with milk and honey, that would give them an abundance of life, and should be a situation where they would be a beacon of hope to the world, where they should have established themselves truly as God's people. And because of God's relationship with them and because of the blessings that they could have had a truly blessed existence. However, they chose to chase the gods of the nations around them. They chose time and time again to give in to idolatry and sin. And because of that, in this land that God had promised them, they faced more punishment than they did blessing. And it would happen in this case with Gideon that they had been enslaved to the Midianites for 7 years because of their sin. Historically, these men could not be in two different places because Moses comes in and he's really setting the tone. He's the paradigm. He's the example we look to for someone who's got a mission from God, and he goes in and he fulfills it, and they come out in incredible circumstances. Moses didn't have an example of that prior to him. He would be setting the tone, the one that would always be referenced to in later stories of the Bible. In fact, in Gideon's story, once the angel of the Lord appears to him, there was a callback to the promises that were made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And when there was a prophet that was sent to the people to tell them what was going on in Judges chapter 6, there was a callback to that historical moment in the Exodus when God brought them out of Egyptian bondage. But like Moses, where there was a burning bush, there was an appearance of the angel of the Lord to Gideon as well. And he was given an incredible charge. Go set my people free. And God, in that moment, I love the language that he uses. And in fact, turn there with me to Judges chapter 6, because as he's there, he gives this encouraging statement. Both men also seem to obstruct their capabilities in how they viewed themselves. And God was very patient and very kind in the way he would bring them about to let them see themselves the way he saw their opportunity. But even his opening statement to Gideon is pretty stunning. He says in verse 12 of Judges chapter 6, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him, and he said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. Now, when the angel of the Lord is speaking, he's speaking the truth. And he's given this charge. It's not yet, but he's trying to get Gideon to get to that point. But from Gideon's perspective, this would be a lot to process. There's nothing to indicate that Gideon saw him as anything particularly noteworthy. Moses, clearly a burning bush, Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, and it did not consume itself. Something was going on in that situation. Verse 3, he said, I got to go see what's going on with this. And he hears that voice to take his sandals off because the ground he's stepping on is holy ground. Gideon gives no special distinction that who he's talking to is anybody noteworthy. In fact, he's kind of processing it. But from his perspective, this notion, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor, it's not going to process with him. He is currently threshing wheat at a wine press and doing it secretly so that the Midianites cannot see what is going on. He seems to be a young man still attached to his father's house. And in a later part of the story, we recognize that his father has an altar set up to Baal, a false god itself. What in the world would cause anyone to view Gideon as a mighty man of valor? It's a lot to process for him. And Gideon said, "Oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? Where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." Not a complete story, not a complete understanding. The reality is your sin and your resistance to God and your choice to turn your back on him has led to this situation. But he's pushing back on the call. He's pushing back. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours." Again, calling him out and seeing something in him he didn't see in himself. "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" So he said to him, "O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." He's saying, I'm not capable of doing this. Why would you speak to me this way? Now, that's something that seems very familiar when you think about the story of Moses, isn't it? In Exodus chapter 3, Moses has got the burning bush, which is in and of itself a remarkable thing that you would have to take note of. But then when the voice comes out of it and says, I've heard the cry of my people and I'm going to give you this charge, this responsibility, you would think, my goodness, I'm in a situation that is beyond the norm. And I have this voice calling to me and giving me this charge. I should go do that. Much like we would see Isaiah in Isaiah 6 when we talked about him. But instead, Moses obstructs this opportunity because of the limitations he has in his own self, for whatever reason. The first thing he says to God is, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And God says, well, indeed, when you come to he says, I will certainly be with you, is what he replies to him, which should be enough. Who am I that I should go see Pharaoh? And God says, but I'm going to be with you. And then yet again, he pushes back, although God has given him an answer and provided for him a blessing for sure. He says, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God gives him a blessing, an incredible patience, because he says, tell them that I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. You would think that, surely that is enough. God says, I will certainly be with you. And on top of that, God explains a little bit about himself and then even gives you the blessing of having a name by which to call him. And that establishes a kind of relationship with God. Surely that would do it. Moses obstructs this opportunity one more time. Chapter 4. He said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. God gives him an answer. Tells him to throw down his rod and does the hand and pulls it out and heals it. And it's by signs and wonders, and it's God's power. It's by God's power that this is going to unfold. And even still, Moses goes one more time and he says, I'm not an eloquent man. Now, God's hit a point here, but he gives him an answer. It's interesting that both men are given this great charge to free God's people. God says, I will be with you. It is through my power this is going to unfold. But they obstruct themselves. Gideon would go on and require certain signs. In Judges 6, the first would be, he says, if this is true, wait here till I get back. And he went and got an offering to him. And of course, the angel consumed that in a fire, and he disappeared. And the Gideon's realizing, oh, okay, something's happening here. And even still, he asked for more signs. If I put the fleece out, would the dew only be on the fleece and not on the ground? God makes that happen. But he says, but one more time, if I put the fleece out and the dew's only on, the ground and not on the fleece, then how patient is our God? But how good is our God? Sometimes we hold ourselves back in these incredible opportunities of faith like these two men, but once we get out of the way and we start realizing that the focus is not on us, but it's really about God, because it's God who would provide the instructions on what to say and what to do and when to go and how to unfold the narrative for both men. It would be God who would tell Moses what to say to Pharaoh, and it would be God who would tell Gideon how to tear down the Baal and the Asherah in his father's house. And it would be him who would whittle his army down from 32,000 down to 300 men. And it would be God's power that would cause the Midianite soldiers to turn on one another. And it would be God's power that would cause the 10 plagues to affect the Egyptians. And it would be God's power that would allow the Israelites to come out of slavery. And it would be God's power that will allow the Israelites to come out of slavery to the Midianites. The story, the focus is always on God, not us. We have the privilege to be men and women of faith, to serve God. And sometimes we have to get out of our own way in the midst of that. That's a story that we see unfold in both of them. And there's many, many other things that we're going to discuss today. But at the end of these stories, there was tremendous success and there was tremendous blessing for a great number of people. These two men had the privilege, the honor of being a part of God's plan and moving by faith and let God's plan unfold. They had to be the men who would simply listen to God and take action. That same truth exists for us today. There's many things that God asks us to do. There's a lot of excuses we could give, and there's a lot of ways we can get in the way of the growth of the church and the success of the church. But sometimes it's because we let our fears and our doubts and our low value for what God has commanded us get in the way. When we learn to set that aside and we grab a hold of God and the opportunities He gives us, what blessings could not come our way, because it's God who leads us in life, and it is God's purposes that we chase after. That's our challenge as we go into discussions today. How do we hold ourselves back? And how do we let God lead us through His Word and through prayer and all the opportunities He gives us to press on for the glory of His people and for His kingdom? And all those people that are out there in the world today that are suffering enslaved to sin, how do we participate in presenting them the gospel so they can know freedom? We are given a great blessing and a privilege to serve, much in the same way as Moses and Gideon. There's not a lot of difference between us and them. We're going to close there, and then we'll give you the opportunity to talk a lot about this tonight in our discussion groups. But first, we want to offer you the invitation. Tonight, you may say, I have been a great obstruction to the work that God has given. Maybe you've put some sort of blockage in the works of the church. Maybe you've caused some level of disruption, and you say, I can't do that anymore. Maybe in your own life, you've heard the possibilities that God has given, and because of your fears and your doubts and your more likelihood to say, I can't, or no, you've let that obstruct what possibilities could exist. Maybe tonight you're just like, let's not have that anymore. Maybe tonight you want to see yourself as a person of faith, of action for God's glory. Maybe tonight's the night that you even want to put on Christ and become a Christian. Don't hold back. Don't hesitate. Don't make excuses. Be people of action. The ways that we can help you with that tonight, come forward as we stand and as we sing.